All right, folks, it is July 11th, 2024. And of course, there are a number of things going on in the world and all along those lines. We actually took a break yesterday from the online dinner party because I actually had to do an interview with some folks that were doing research on HBCU radio. So that was actually fun. So I actually had the pleasure of going to one of our local podcast studios and being interviewed by a young lady who was looking at the history of the WNCU and other stations that are fitting in that mold. So apparently there's like around 29 of them around the country at the moment, and she was just doing some research as to how they got started, their purpose, and how they were doing in terms of their fate and all along those lines. So it was an interesting conversation. Got to give her some history on my involvement with WNCU as well as my involvement with my parents' radio station and other radio stations that I've been involved with as well. So my good friend Brett Chambers got me involved in that project, and I'll give him a call later on to see his thoughts on it because he was the one that initiated my involvement in that particular project and all along those lines. So definitely it was an insightful conversation, and we definitely talked about the future of black media and particularly black radio and HBCU radio in that sense. So like I said, it was definitely a fun conversation, and even talked about how folks are getting more into social media as well to some degree. So we definitely talked about a lot of interesting things. So this was a project that is actually being funded, I think, by one of our government agencies or all along those lines to do research in this particular endeavor. So, like I said, I was glad to be able to give some insights as best as I could, and all along those lines, they'll actually send me a copy of it, and maybe even a copy of the tape that I might make available to Pod TV and the folks to see some of the comments I made, because definitely even had a little bit of humor in there as I talked about what it was like being thrust into radio when you're coming back from college and your parents are picking you up and they own a radio station, and also talked about some other things that were humorous, including how I might have been a little bit too open with what was going on in my dating life by the choices of songs that I picked in the blues world and all along those lines. So, like I said, it was definitely an interesting conversation, and we had some fun with the conversation. I think, like I said, they've got more interviews, including with my past station manager at that particular station. But now getting to the real news and all along those lines, apparently prices fell in June for the first time since the start of the pandemic. So that is something that is going on. The S&P 500 is trading near records after the CPI report shows easing June inflation. So that is what they are reporting at the moment and all along those lines. So definitely it'll be interesting to see what's going on in that space. And speaking of radio and everything, on NPR, they're saying that Biden is holding a rare solo news conference to try to show you that he's up for this campaign. So definitely there are a number of folks, including a Democrat, that are still calling for Biden to drop out, and one of his major Hollywood endorsers is also asking for him to drop out as well. And I was even reading some people speculating that maybe he wants to run for race as well, that being George Clooney and all along those lines. And 67% of Americans are saying that Biden should bow out of the presidential race. So there are a lot of folks that are asking him to go ahead and make that decision and all along those lines. And apparently they're even saying, as far as George Clooney, that Obama knew in advance of George Clooney's bombshell call for Biden to drop out, but he didn't object to him making that announcement and all along those lines. So maybe he was given a heads up before it took place and all in that kind of way. So that was definitely some interesting things that were going on as well. And of course, we do have the NATO conference going on up there in DC. And apparently, some of the frontline nations are sounding the alarm at NATO summit. That means the front line of the war between Russia and Ukraine. So they are definitely putting their thoughts about that and everything along those lines. And Ukraine aid remains in focus on the last day of the talks in the U.S. So definitely, it's folks that are still paying attention and also seeing how Biden is coming across when he is making his comments as well. Speaking of folks making comments, I was watching, and I know it's a liberal source, Midas Touch, and they were actually looking at how former President Trump had some comments. I think he made that Hannibal Lecter joke once again, and he also said some other things, including needing a water spot or some other things when he was having his rally and down there in Florida. And I think he also challenged Biden to a golf match. And I have actually said before, and I'll say it again right here on the public network, since we are a network that is international and everything. And since I've got Nick here with me, maybe we should host that golf match as well. There's enough pretty golf courses here in the North Carolina area as well as other places. I think he would challenge them to do it at the one that is in his home state of Florida and might even be on his property. But I think we could bring them down to Trayburn or some of the other places. It could be quite an interesting golf match, because apparently he doesn't think that Biden can hold his own at any golf match in that sense. And I do have an uncle that passed away that used to be very avid into golf, and I know some other people that are in that space, so maybe they can help put it together for us and all along those lines. That's probably just some wishful thinking, but hey, we might as well put it out in the ethos and see what happens, and all along those lines. And of course, there is still stuff going on in Palestine and Israel. Palestinians are resisting Israeli call to leave the Gaza city, and UN humanitarian coordinator reports of a group of men with sticks waiting to loot aid trucks, and all along those lines. So that is definitely an interesting story as well. And fire breaks out in the spire of the Rhone Cathedral in the northwest France. So definitely that has now been brought under control in Normandy. So definitely looks like the French firefighters did a good job of getting that situated, and all along those lines. And a woman was swept out to sea off of the Japanese beach, but she was rescued 37 hours later and 50 miles offshore. And though definitely that is something quite interesting. As a matter of fact, I was watching, and I know it's fiction, an old episode of Magnum PI, where he was stranded out in the sea as well. Definitely, I can only imagine what that would be like, trying to figure out how you can get to land. I think he was out there for, of course, like I said, that was a fictional story, for a matter of a day, or maybe even a day and a half, if I remember the storyline correctly. And Russia is vowing military response to U.S. missile deployments in Germany. And at the NATO summit, allies are moving to counter Russia and bolster Ukraine. So U.S. is to send Tomahawks, hypersonics, and other long-range fires to Germany. So U.S. cruise missiles are to return to Germany, angering Moscow. So definitely that's something else that we're seeing as well. And the British police found the suspect after the killing of the BBC commentator's wife and two daughters using a crossbow. So they have found that person as well. And in Kenya, Kenya's President Ruto fires his almost entire cabinet after a protest. So after some anti-tax protests, he has decided to basically get rid of his the majority of his cabinet, and all along those lines. And I did see that Shaquille is here, and I know Shaquille does some international travel and does some international contacts, so maybe he'll have some thoughts about some of these international stories that I brought up as well. And apparently Macron has ended his silence and calling for a broad gathering that would split the left, and Conservative Party is leading in the first round of the French election. So people of diverse backgrounds in France are welcoming the far right's defeat, but fear a rise in hate speech. So definitely that is something else going on as well. And definitely, it looks like Iran's freedom protesters are reacting to their new president and are saying that they feel betrayed by the West. So definitely, there are some folks that are thinking as to what those changes could make with the new leader, who is apparently a reformist, and all along those lines. And the U.S. Soccer has fired their men's national team coach, Greg Berhalter. So I think that they're hoping to have some better luck and all along those lines. And I understand that there was a soccer match, I believe, in Charlotte, North Carolina, between Uruguay and Colombia. I think Colombia won 1-0. And I know that Sasha was rooting for Uruguay. And I also understand that some of the Uruguayan fans got a little bit testy and got into a little bit of a battle in the stands and all along those lines. But we do know that soccer can have some very avid fans as well. So definitely be interesting to see what folks have to say about that. And speaking of soccer, with a late goal fit for a king, England reaches another Euro final by beating the Netherlands. So Prince William celebrated an England soccer win as King Charles worries for the nation's collective heart rate. So that's something else that folks are thinking about as well. And the UAE has put 84 civil society members on trial again, sentencing 43 to life. So that is something going on in the United Arab Emirates. So that is something else that folks are seeing about as well. and the remains of 14 Srebrenica victims buried 29 years after the genocide. It looks like those have been found or all along those lines, so, or maybe they're commemorating it. So definitely that is something else that was in the news as well. So definitely there's a lot of things going on the international front. And of course, we know there's a lot going on in the U.S., including folks trying to figure out whether Biden will stay in the race or not. And of course, like I said, George Clooney did call for him to quit the presidential race. And definitely there's a number of other things going on as well, including a NBC interview where the Baltimore Bridge collapse survivor recounts fighting for his life. So that's something else that folks are listening to, and all along those lines. And in Texas, they're still dealing with the recovery from Beryl. So folks are wondering, when will the power be back? Centerpoint Energy is publishing its initial restoration tracker, and I think that there are still a number of people that are without power in that area and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on there. And we know abortion may be an interesting issue during the time of the November elections, and apparently in Arkansas, the Arkansas Abortion Rights Ballot Initiative has been rejected by their Secretary of State. So it was an effort to put that on the ballots, and it has been disqualified from the ballot. So we'll see what folks have to say about that and all along those lines. And apparently Trump has disavowed Project 2025, and he's also claiming that he doesn't know who is behind Project 2025. And definitely there are some folks that are saying that some folks that even work for him that are behind that particular project, but you don't have to know that it's everybody that is in your team necessarily. So maybe he doesn't know folks that are involved or how they are involved, and all along those lines. And Rudy Giuliani has declared bankruptcy, but apparently appears flush with cash, and creditors are angry about that. And Rudy Giuliani has interrupted bankruptcy court hearing and denied the fraud. So definitely that's something else going on as well. And if you're wondering about the heat, Las Vegas over there is marking its historic fifth day of 115 plus degrees in most extreme heat wave ever. So that's something going on, as well as a Chinese military ship being spotted near the Alaska's Aleutian Islands. So definitely it looks like multiple Chinese warships were spotted near Alaska, according to the U.S. Coast Guard. And that's definitely something that I'm sure folks will be paying attention to as well. So definitely folks are paying attention to everything from the weather to the fires there in California, that they still got some of those going on, to even a number of the things that are taking place internationally as well. So definitely it'll be interesting to see how this goes on and all along those lines. And we've still got the Bob Menendez trial. So there's closing statements over in that senator's trial, and definitely Menendez has declared his resurrection, and definitely there are folks that are wondering about that and all along those lines. And in Milwaukee, a Milwaukee hotel worker was fired after the death of a African-American man who was pinned down outside, and protesters are comparing the death of Devontae Mitchell to George Floyd. So apparently the Hyatt hotel operators fired the employees at Devontae Mitchell's death is being investigated as a homicide. So that is something going on in the area where the Republican Party will be having their convention. So the Republicans have advanced the SAVE Act, and definitely the House is passing a bill requiring voters prove citizenship in federal elections. So definitely this is something else that is going on, and folks might have some interesting thoughts about that, including this notion of folks that are trying to impeach Justices Alito, Thomas, and alleging that there are unchecked corruption, including AOC, who is behind that, because apparently she filed those articles of impeachment and all along that kind of way. So like I said, I'll get ready to bring up my fellow panelists, see what they've got to say about a number of these stories. And actually, I had the pleasure last night of listening to none other than Robert Reich, who is a former labor commissioner. I think he was the labor commissioner under Bill Clinton, and he had some interesting thoughts about populism and all along those lines. So he's actually got a show that he does, I believe it's on Saturday. So I actually listened to a couple of episodes where he was kind of theorizing about the rise of populism, the popularity of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and doing a number of other interesting conversations. At some point or another, I may try to find copies of that tape and bring them up, because he definitely brought up some interesting points, including what he felt Biden should do and what the the Democratic Party should do, and a number of other things as well. And you know me, I might be crazy enough to try to reach out to him and his team and see if we can't get them on Pod TV and have them talk to us directly and all along those lines. But we'll see if any of that takes place and all along that kind of way. And I did have a quick question, because I know sometimes we bring up the notion of LGBTQI rights and all along those lines. And I did see that a person that is connected, I think it's the daughter of one of the leaders of the country, that has some very strict LGBTQI rules in terms of the way that they treat that particular community. And I believe it is in Cameroon. But apparently the child of the president came out as a member of the gay or LGBTQI community, and she's hoping to by coming out that she will get them to be a little bit less restrictive in their rules, because there are a number of African nations that can be very restrictive and all along those lines. So I think that this just took place recently, and I did see that as well. So like I said, I know that definitely some of our people, Adam is legally got a legal mind, as does Dr. Dan Worthington. And of course, we've got Shaquille, who has got some international travels, and I know he's dealt with some things in Africa as well. But I guess that's where I'll start the story at and everything. So Shaquille, before I bring on the other folks, what is your thoughts on this? Because I do know that there are a number of countries that can be very restrictive in the way that they, and even mild compared to the U.S. rules and everything, the way that they treat people in that community and all along those lines. So I did see that it would be almost like in the U.S. when Obama was coming out, Malaya or Sasha coming out as a member of that community. Not that they've done that, because I think that they've actually involved in relationships with guys, if I remember correctly. But it was definitely, it caught my eyes, and I was just interested your thoughts and other people's thoughts about that, because there are some countries around the world, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, a number of other places that are very restrictive in their rules. I'll just put it that way. They can even be very deadly in their rules as well. But I do know that it was an interesting idea. And like I said, when I saw the article, I was going like, I got to ask Shaquille about this. Got to ask some of the other folks as well. But I did think that was a brave move on her part, since apparently Cameroon has some strict rules, and it might even be her going against her own dad and all along those lines.
The rebellion of one of your kids, right? Look, there are many countries in the world, Palestine, many other Islamic countries, where the penalties are very, very severe. Africa is not quite like that. What you do sort of privately, nobody really knows about. Okay, so I think that what you've seen is that many of these countries don't want to take more liberal positions. Now, we can criticize them for that, and we can encourage them to perhaps become more in line with the more liberal positions that we have in the West. But I don't think that we should bully them into it. These are developing countries. They've got a number of other issues that are facing them that are far more important to them. And as many of the presidents of these countries have said on interviews, this is not a priority for them, because it's not a priority to the people of their country. So I think that when we try to impose Western values on them, it's a mistake for us to do that. They may eventually come to our way of thinking, but I think it's a mistake for us to do it, especially when we say that they should have the right to run their countries the way they see fit, after predominantly the European countries went into Africa and imposed other types of rules that they didn't want. So, let them be. They will develop. There's a number of issues that I think are far more serious, like female mutilation and things like that. I've got a friend of mine over in Kenya who actually won a Freedom Award, I think it was, from President Obama, because of the things that she deals with girls that are going through this, and with child marriage and all those sorts of things. So these issues are complicated, and I think it's really dangerous for us to judge them on through our standards. I think that's the wrong thing to do. Lastly, there was a comment made yesterday about the death penalty in Africa. The specific case that I know is being referred to, which we've discussed on previous shows, I just want to make the point. I can't comment on the specifics of that case. All I will say is this: the actual charge was aggravated homosexuality. Now, without me going into the details of what that means, I think people should look up what aggravated homosexuality means in their terms and in their laws, because it's not as cut and dry as just two males had a sexual encounter and one of them was then given the death penalty. That is not what happened. Now, I personally still believe that the penalty is a little bit harsh compared to what we would expect, but please don't just apply the way that we view things on them. In the same way as I would say with drugs. Okay, I'm a very liberal person when it comes to drugs. I don't think that it should be illegal. Okay, Dan Worthington and Adam Lamparello, I believe, don't agree with me on that. But I think that people should be able to have access to drugs if they so choose. That's the liberal in me that says that. But when you go to some Asian countries, it's the death penalty. So, again, whilst those aren't the penalties in our countries for drugs, although Donald Trump and some other Republicans are suggesting it should be, that's not the penalty that we have in our Western countries. But let's not apply that standard to other nations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Adam. One of the things, like I said, I was listening to Robert Rake, and I know he's got some liberal views and all of. But one of the things he was talking about, which I love to hear everybody's thoughts, and maybe even Utopia and Shaquille want to jump in, is this notion of a rise in the popularity in populism, and all along those lines, they were saying that that's part of the reason of the success. He and his co-host of both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and all along those lines. And there was also talking about a kind of push against labor unions, because apparently there was a time when I think he said there was like 30 or 35% of people used to belong to unions, and now it's down to like 6%. And they were talking about the rise of big business and how big business had busted a lot of the unions and fought against the unions, and a number of other things. But like I said, it was a quite fascinating interview. I listened to two of the sessions, the one from this past Saturday and the one from the Saturday before, actually earlier this morning, because I got up a little bit earlier than I was expecting and everything. But I just wanted your take, maybe Dan's got some takes on it as well, about this notion of a rise in populism field, not just here, but it seems like it's a rising field around the world.
Well, in response to that, I'll make three brief points. When I was vacationing in Long Island last week, gas was $4.69 per gallon. Number two, when I went to the grocery store, I spent over $200 on groceries that lasted me 3 days. And when I look at our southern border, I see an influx of over 8 million people this year who are burdening our social welfare system, namely Medicaid, and taking jobs from people. And I say, well, the middle class has obviously become an afterthought for this administration. And that is the problem. People are going to vote. You say populism. People are going to vote based on how their lives are going at the time. When you look at inflation, when you look at gas prices, when you look at immigration, when you look at the economy, when you look at taxes, the middle class is getting obliterated. And that is an empirical fact. And that is why Donald Trump has tapped into that sentiment, leads in the polls, and will be elected in 2024. Now, the Democrats would like to make all these statements about how our society is systemically racist, how people are oppressed. Go into any law school, you'll hear it from professors incessantly as they miseducate and misinform future lawyers. But the bottom line is the average American better off now than under Trump's administration? The answer is no, and that's why the polls show what they show.
Okay.
Adam, what is your definition of an average American?
My definition of an average American, well, you can define it in many different ways. How I'm operationalizing an average American is someone that is not wealthy, someone who is a member of the middle class, someone who often works day to day and from paycheck to paycheck. And when these individuals, particularly with those with children and those who are single parents, go to the gas station and are paying $4.69 a gallon, over $200 for groceries that last them 3 days, while seeing illegal immigrants put in fancy hotels in New York City, you have a perception problem, if not a problem in reality. And that is why Donald Trump is winning more among independents and more among young voters. And you will see Trump elected to a second term in November.
Adam, I've only seen TikTok videos gaslighting of immigrants being put into fancy hotels. Can you list these hotels for us?
No.
Have you seen them yourself?
Yes.
So you have seen the hotel.
I'll help you out. It's the Roosevelt Hotel in.
Yeah, I didn't get into
Roosevelt,
granular
California.
analysis of what exact hotels are. I know that they are staying at
I'll
hotels.
give you an exact hotel I used to stay at. It's called the Roosevelt. Everybody knows where it is. It's in Midtown Manhattan. I used to stay there. It's a nice 4-star hotel, and it's now completely occupied, being paid for by your taxpayers' money for basically illegal immigrants.
And let's think about that.
May I say something?
Nick, hold on a second.
Hold on a
May
second.
I say something about that?
Always the
You're
case.
being paid for.
Hold on a second, Nick. But I don't understand. It's
The
not always the case.
piranhas
But
are
weren't there
all
some
everyone-
people? Hold on a second. Weren't there some of the people that were from Republican strongholds that actually are paying those taxes? Because I do know there are some people like DeSantis and the guy from Texas that actually footed those bills. So we can't say that it's all Biden, because I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying Biden didn't do part of it, but there are some of these are a response to them coming into their states. So they sent them to states that they feel are more liberal and more democratic and everything. And that is.
May I please just say something? I'm just going to take the conversation out of the United States just for a moment, because the analogy that I want to use, I think, applies to the US. So we here in Australia have also had a relatively large influx of immigrants. Now, when we say a large influx of immigrants, we're talking about 500,000 people. Okay, but we're a much smaller country than you guys. Now, what has happened is it's created a critical housing shortage. Our economy under the Labor Party has had a similar sort of trajectory to what the US has had. But there's a lot of people that are very, very unhappy. Now, I was a renter for a big part of my young life. And I remember that it was really easy to get a rental property once upon a time. And then I remember one time coming back to my former father-in-law's house and putting my head in my hands and basically crying because it was just so hard to get a house. We've been looking for 6 months to try and find a house. What I think is happening, whether it be Democrat or Republican policy, is that some people benefit and some people don't. And what happens is that when the people that aren't benefiting from something or are somehow being hurt are sometimes not being listened to by the big parties that are in charge. So, for example, here in Australia, if you are a conservative, to use your terms, if you're a conservative in Australia and you own property, it's probably in your interest to vote for the left. Why? Because they have more permissive immigration policies. And the critical housing shortage that is being complained about in the media today is something that you actually don't want to have resolved. Why would you? Because it's pushing up the asset prices of the very assets that you're holding. But you're also seeing young people and people that are renters not being able to get into housing, not being able to stay in that housing, and not being able to afford anything. So when those people complain, I think that when big political parties dismiss that and say, well, on the macroeconomics, things look good. GDP's increased more than inflation, which is something that I always talk about. Those things look good at a macro level, but there are people being hurt. And I think that the political parties on both sides of the aisle are completely out of touch with the people that they're supposed to be elected to represent. And I don't think it needs to be this way if we can just get away from some of the division that goes on.
Well, Mark, let me
I
make a
think
quick
the
point to that for
division
20
is
seconds.
huge.
Look,
I think
let me
the
just make a
problem. Go ahead, Adam.
well, all I'm going to say is the stock market is at what? Over 39,000. Wages have increased since 1980 by only 16%. What does that tell you? The rich are getting richer and the middle class is suffering. And you want to talk about the middle class, they have no access and influence in politics. Who do you think influences Congress? George Clooney and very, very rich people. And the American people have started to finally catch on. And that's why Trump is tapping into that sentiment and will win a second term.
And
But
you
yeah,
don't think
but
Trump
Adam,
is
people like
benefiting
myself-
during this? You don't think Trump is benefiting during this economic downturn?
I think Trump should benefit because Trump has been an outstanding real estate mogul in New York City, and he has earned, and he's made some bad decisions, certainly, and certainly has some issues with his temperament. But every penny that every rich person has earned, they deserve. I'm not talking about that. I'm also saying that the middle class should also have opportunities too for upward mobility. When you see a 16% wage increase over the last 45 years, when the stock market's going through the roof, you have a problem. And when you see elite wealthy individuals influencing politics the way they do, whether it be the NRA, whether it be George Clooney, or whether it be your wealthy people in the Hamptons, that's not democracy for everyone. That's democracy for the few.
But Adam, can we address? I think the elephant in the room on this issue.
I think it's
It's not
Jatovi's
just
turn. Jatovi hasn't had a turn. Go ahead, Jatovi.
Just to point out, the question that's always asked, especially during every election, is the one that Adam put forth, which is, are you better off 4 years than you are today? The definitive answer currently right now is yes, we're better off. The perception is that we're not, because the messaging has actually been grabbing hold and people believe it. For example, under the Trump administration, the Trump administration touted the stock market as breaking records and going highs and everything else. Well, up under the Biden administration, it has gone higher and broken more records, but now it's seen differently. It's being told differently. And Dan, I completely agree. That's spin. But if we're talking directly about the stock market, yes, it's higher now than it was up under Trump. So we cannot change the fact that it's higher now. So let's not change the idea that, oh, well, it's bad now because it's up under Biden. Same thing with unemployment. Unemployment is lower now than it was up under Biden. But when it was up under Trump, it was called, oh, the greatest success. It is super low now. Oh my gosh, it is so great. Black unemployment is so low, it's record well, black unemployment has hit a record low under Biden than it has under, it's lower under Biden than it was under Trump. Same thing, unemployment. Same thing about, the pay scale that was referenced by Adam as well about slowly going up. It's higher now than it was up under Trump. We tend to forget that, truthfully, on one hand, yes, it is better now. But then we also have to take into account, yes, there are negatives up under Biden. The record inflation is a big time negative. But for some odd reason, we forget that the record inflation was definitely caused by a lot of the expenditures done due to COVID and all of the supply chains drying up, everything under the sun drying up. And then when everything got turned on immediately, the gas jumped because there was a high demand for gas and the supply wasn't there at the time because there was no reason to drive because the country was shut down up under Trump. So when we're talking about these things and looking at that balanced equation, that idea of better now than better then, truthfully, we are better now. The perception is that we were better then because, what you're talking about with the inflation itself, inflation is bad, but then we forget to think that corporate profits are skyrocketing right now. So how can you have inflation as one piece that we're so upset about, but championing corporate profits when the corporations are also a part of that inflation because you have that false inflation that comes into play, which has been documented. So that's something that we also need to look into and honestly have that balanced discussion about. Truthfully, of the two candidates, the economy has been doing better up under Biden. It's just a fact. But the thing is, the perception is that it's done better up under Trump. Just because those ideas that we want to give him, oh, well, we forget that Trump was the only president to lose jobs rather than actually gain jobs. Well, that's because of COVID. Well, the inflation was due to COVID. and we give that benefit of the doubt there. So we forget about these things. And if we're going to have that honest discussion about it, truthfully, if we're talking reality, we're better
No,
now
we're not.
than 4 years ago. Perception, I'll agree with you. That perception has stuck that we were better then. But that always happens when the party campaigning always sounds better than the party in power. Hence the reason why, if you look at our history, that wave that comes in when the president is in for those 4 years, that midterm election, the party in power tends to lose seats because it's easier to talk about the things that you want done, and it's easy with the complaints.
Toby.
Dan, I never interrupted anybody. Please don't interrupt me. So if you
Just
have
finish
something
your
to
point
say,
already.
if you have something to say, please say it after I have finished. You're more than welcome to take the floor then.
And don't do that.
Talk
either.
about all,
This is
talk
one of
about
the
me all
reasons
you
we
want.
always end up.
But
into
no,
a
you're
problem.
talking again still. Put yourself on mute and we can continue the conversation. We're having such a good conversation.
It's not a conversation, it's a
Well, there we
monologue.
go.
Which
You're
is what
talking
I'm
on top of
Mark
me
is
again.
nice
Let
to
me
you.
finish my
Thanks,
point,
Mark.
and you can take the floor. Just put yourself on mute just for a second. Please wait. So again, I agree with the perception, but the reality is not there because the facts and the figures prove differently. And that's where the hang up is. And honestly, the reason Trump is winning is partially due to that, as well as the fact that people say that Biden is old and he's never going to get past that old line. So yeah, that's the reason Trump is winning.
And just really quickly, I see Dan has a comment as well. But one thing that I saw that was interesting on that Robert Reich interview, and it was almost like a tit for tat, kind of like the battle with the golf and all along those lines with this notion. And I don't know because I don't travel in those circles. Maybe those of you that travel in those circles can tell me whether it's true or not. But part of what was said in, I think, the Robert Reich interview, I don't think it was the other one, which was the Midas Touch one that I was listening to, and everything was this notion that both Trump and Biden own multiple homes. So I had never really heard about the multiple homes from the Biden side. I heard it all the time about Trump and the different properties that he owned, but they were saying that apparently President Biden owns a number of them, including some that are in, I want to say maybe in islands or off the Caribbean or something like that. But they mentioned like 5 or 6. And like I said, this was my first time hearing that. So I don't know if that's true or not, or if people are thinking that that's even a legitimate concern. Because even sometimes when you talk to church leaders, they will sometimes talk about how they have multiple houses and multiple properties and all along those lines. So I don't know if this is something that is a legitimate concern within the conversation of the politics or not, but it was something that was brought up and all along those lines. So if folks are
we're 38 minutes in and Dan hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. I'd like to respond to a few things, but can we go to Dan and let him respond to some of the comments that were made?
Yes. Dan?
Okay, so I think we just got gaslighted by Jacoby. And that's okay. I mean, that's his perspective. He can have his perspective. Democrats spin the economy that way. And as like Adam said, some people are better off. If you look at the technocrats and those in the elite cities, see, if you look at the electoral map, it's deeply red all over the country except in the big cities. And there's a reason for that, because ordinary Americans live in rural America and have real problems that are different than the people who live in the big cities. The strategy is flood the border with illegal immigrants and then encourage them to vote. In fact, get your hand down. It's disrespectful. When the Congress voted on something that should have been obvious, that you should prove your citizenship or be a U.S. citizen to vote, we had all but a handful of Democrats that didn't vote for that voted against that. So you have the possibilities and the Biden administration and their administrative functionaries that are trying to register these people to vote when they go in for welfare benefits and other things. That is electoral fraud. And that is something the Democrats are willing to do. Why? Because they want to maintain their power no matter what. They want to hang on to their liberal agenda. They want to continue to destroy America and undermine it, and destroy the middle class of America, and destroy the freedoms of ordinary citizens who should be the ones that benefit from our laws and from our economy, and not a bunch of folks who decided to rush the border and bum rush the Social Security line. It's ridiculous that it's come to this with so much baiting and everything else. Now, Jacoby, the economy, the ordinary American was better off under Trump. You're seeing that more than half the people support him now. Why? Because it's obvious that that's true. Now, do I like Trump? No, I don't like Trump, but he's better than the alternative. He's not the poster boy because he's got a lot of flaws, right? I mean, there's a lot of wrinkles and scars on the man, but he's better than the alternative because Biden has not only probably got a serious medical condition that prevents him from being an effective president, which undermines the confidence of other nations in the world in our ability to lead, and compromises his leadership significantly. Trump is a strong leader. He was vigorous in getting many things done, even though he was attacked constantly in the last presidential term that he had. Democrats didn't let down on anything, constantly attacked. And even when all those things were chosen to be false. It's like, when is this going to stop? And then the Democrats complain, well, Trump's just going to turn around and prosecute us. Well, hell, why not? That's what happened to him. I mean, you guys have been doing a bunch of illegal stuff. Anytime you claim a Republican does something wrong, you just turn it around and double down. That's exactly how Democrats do their politics. I'm tired of it. And frankly, I think the American people are. That's why Trump has the support he has, because they can see the bum rush. They can see the fix was in. And the unfortunate thing is Biden has shown his incapacity to lead since that time, right? By his babbling on TV and in national and international forums. That's enough.
So can I come in, because I said I wanted to say a couple of things, and it might come as a slight surprise to Adam and Dan. I think that the killer line, which was, I think, rehearsed, was in the debate, was when Biden said, yes, inflation was very low was at zero when I became the president, but that was because the economy was on its back. And I think that was actually quite a powerful line that he delivered there. As Toby said before, yes, gas prices were lower, etc., because people weren't driving. I think that the big issue is that the money has ended up in the hands of the very, very wealthy, and it hasn't been distributed to everybody. And so whilst the economy at a macro scale, like I said before, looks good, a lot of people have felt like they're left behind. But I also want to bring up something, and it's actually not in my personal interest to bring this up. But I'm going to bring this up because I think it's the elephant in the room that Americans never talk about. You guys are by far the most international country in the world. You are happy to have investments come in from everywhere else. A lot of other countries have restrictions. I can be in almost any country in the world and buy property, for example, in the US. A lot of other countries have restrictions on that. So when this money goes up into big corporations, it's people like me who benefit from it. It's international investors that benefit from it. Now, ordinarily, I would just say, cool, hey, if the US taxpayer is prepared to, pump the market, I'm prepared to take it. The reason that I say anything is because I have so much love and respect for the US, and I don't like to see the US people being hurt so that I can make an extra few thousand or a few $100,000 or whatever dollars, because I can make that money anywhere. I can make that money in Europe. So what you have is a system which actually gets lobbied, not just internally, like Adam talked about, the rich people in the Hamptons, but what about the rich people in London? What about the rich people in Dubai? What about all of the rich people all over the world and the hedge funds? You know, US hedge funds, or rephrase that, a lot of hedge funds that have US people behind them aren't domiciled in the US. Why? Because they know that they can make all the money and not have to pay anything in taxes. So when you guys say, oh, look, we want to increase taxes on the very wealthy and that sort of thing, you're talking about increasing on the very wealthy within the United States, but international investors don't have to pay it. And there's a whole industry behind looking at tax arbitrage strategies internationally. And I'll say as well for my own country, the UK, I'm one of those very elites that the Brexiteers were trying to put a stop to because we're able to travel around Europe and do all these things. It was not in my interest for Brexit to occur. I was heartbroken when it did. However, I have taken the time to understand where they're coming from, and I agree with them on principle. It's just that it actually hurt me and continues to hurt me that Brexit occurred, because it injured my ability to be able to trade as freely as I was previously able to. I think people need to be just a little bit more pragmatic and understand the issues a little bit more. And American issues, whether you like it or not, are more international than they are in any other country. Sasha, sorry, I'm on my phone, so I actually didn't see you come in. You've got your hand up, please. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, this is a show about world edition, so we have to talk about world affairs a little bit more than we are talking about all this American, just two parties or so on. By the way, the world, judging from this NATO summit in the United States, the world and NATO specifically are preparing themselves for Trump winning presidency. So they are rearranging completely how the NATO is being run. They're removing this Ramstein office where United States had dominant position, not anymore. There will be office established in Ukraine, and each office will have 700 staff members. So the NATO will no longer depend on United States. And Trump and United States, they can do whatever they want. They want to cut completely the help to Ukraine, and the majority of Republicans, probably 90%, that's what they want. Have it, enjoy it. If you will win election, of course. So is now what's being done.
I agree, and we need to talk more on the world topics. But we did have a viewer ask quite an interesting question. I think I'm seeing where she's going here. You know, talk about gaslighting, guys. You know, you are from the elite. You know, she's asking how many of you defending Trump are part of the ordinary, as you discussed, average or commoners that we are. You know, let's start with you, Dan. You know, are you part of the elite or the commoners? Hello? I hear crickets.
I think you're muted, Dan.
I'm on Social Security and consult part-time.
Yeah, so, but before you know, a lot of elderly are on Social Security. We're allowed to collect it even when we're elite. My husband has a lot of friends who got to. So, are you part of the elite or the commoners?
Commoner. I work for nonprofit organizations for nearly
your
my
wealth
entire
status. Career. Your wealth status, Dan.
Pardon?
Your wealth status. You live in a very, very nice home. You worked hard. You were married a few times, had some beautiful family. I mean, you were above average.
Yeah, for several years, then below average for the last probably 15.
Shaq, are you above average or part of the commoners? I agree with her. I'd like to wonder what the agenda is here to support him.
I was next.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll hand over to Adam, but I would like to respond to that, but I'll give it to Adam first.
She did say that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Shaq. I was just going based on the comment. Terry, thanks for that.
Yeah, no,
good
sorry, I'm on my
comment.
phone, so I can't actually read it properly. So I didn't see that your name was up first. So my apologies.
No, totally fine. Like I said, Terry, thanks for that comment. I'm 48 years old. I'm a teacher at Georgia College and State University in Millersville, Georgia. I make $67,000 per year. So I am definitely what you would call a commoner. Now, one thing that your comment misses is that the majority of Trump supporters are commoners. That goes back to what I was saying before. With gas prices as high as they are, with inflation as it is, with the border being flooded with illegal immigrants who are taking advantage of our jobs and our social services, the average person, people like me, feel like the system is not working for them, and Trump is tapping into that sentiment. But when I talk about the system, I also want to talk about something on an individual level, because you can only blame the system so much. For every individual out there, if you get a high school degree, if you don't impregnate your high school girlfriend, and if you stay away from crime, there's a 95% chance you'll be in the middle class. And God forbid you get a college degree after that, your likelihood of actually being in the upper middle class is high. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to blame the government or any systemic issues. Individual choices matter, and it doesn't matter whether you're a commoner or whether you're wealthy. But I would submit that the wealthy are often those that have made those good choices.
Before you get to Shaq, just really quickly, I
So,
will say
Adam,
Can
do
we all
come
mute ourselves,
from-
because there's a lot of background noise coming
I
in?
have a
background.
question.
I'm typing that
Woo!
Kim's doing.
I want to interrupt
Okay.
just a second. Adam, don't you come from the elite side of the world, your family? Aren't you from the elite?
My father has had a high school degree. My mother had a high school degree. They never went to college. My father's dad died when he was 16 years old. He was forced to open up his own business to provide for his two brothers because his mother was dead too. Okay? They work their way into wealth based on years and years of hard work. But I was not the beneficiary of that. My parents didn't give me money. I had to go and make my own life.
You belong to wealth. You come from wealth, and you belong.
I don't even know what you mean by that. You're saying it as if it's a pejorative thing. I don't come from wealth. I come from a family that was upper middle class. But when they sent me to college at USC, they said, we'll pay for your education, but you're on your own after that. And I'm currently making $67,000 a year. I barely have any savings, and I struggle. And that's fine. I don't blame the government for any systemic issues.
Adam, just really quickly, because I was going to get
Yeah, you guys won't interrupt.
Aren't you an adjunct professor at that? Because the person I first mentioned was an adjunct
I'm a
professor.
full-time professor on the tenure track. I had tenure at my last job,
So
but the
you're
law
part
school
of the
closed it.
commoners, but you
Gotcha.
understand coming from wealth and what it's like. Shaq, what about
Adam.
No,
you?
Kim, I should ask you that
I know
question
where
since
she's
you're always
going.
bragging about how
I
your
know
stocks are
where
going up
she's
so
going.
much. Why don't we talk about that? And why don't we ask Country Club Nick that question? Because you're trying to put me
Adam,
into a category that I don't
Nick's not
exist. And that
here.
seems
I would
good
like
for you,
to
Sue.
mention something very interesting, Adam.
I think-
All your
I think
struggles
what she's
will be
hinting
over
around
once
to
Trump
is-
will become a president.
She's
Okay.
hinting around to the support for Trump is a bit overwhelming from wealthy people. I get it. That your agenda is to make things look so bad for the commoners.
Trump's
and
support
you know,
comes from
stuff like-
non-educated college people, people who never went to college. It comes
But
from the middle
Trump-
class and the
If
lower.
it weren't for,
But hold on a second, Kim. I know we got to go to Shaq, but hold on a second. Because one of the things before we get to Shaq that I had recently read was that if you look in North Carolina, where I know you're at and I'm at, and even Jacoby is, the split is actually, I think, 50-50 in rural North Carolina. So rural North Carolina, even to kind of Dan's point, is not necessarily the urban area. Because I heard Dan talking about the urban area and everything, but the split, and there's a significant amount of people that are in rural North Carolina that are actually backing Trump. So that is actually something that just recently came out. So it's a split even in the rural area, because I think it was like 50-50, and that is definitely not necessarily the elite. I would just put it that way. Shaq, did you want to answer the young lady? Now, no, Jacoby's waiting for the answer.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what the lady's name is. If you can bring the quote back up. So I'll be quite honest about this, Terry. Thank you for the question. Whilst I don't normally think of myself as an elite, I have to acknowledge that these days, yes, I am. I'm absolutely an elite. And on prior shows, people have talked about, I drive a Bentley and I own multiple houses, and I, used to run a hedge fund out of Switzerland, and then, I made so much money that at 37, I think I was able to stop working and just trade my own account and travel the world and have a good time. However, I wasn't born into money. My family moved to Australia at a very young age with no money. I'm the product of a single mother because I won't go into my family history, but a single mother who worked overtime as a nurse to put me through private school. And what I did was I screwed it up completely. Instead of taking the normal easy path through life, which Adam just outlined, go to university, get a degree and do things normally, I decided to go off on all sorts of fantastical ideas, and I failed and failed and failed. And I've just had so many really embarrassing failures in my life that have occurred, but I stuck with it and I kept trying, and eventually I made it. However, because I'm not from money, I will talk about how I got here and the things that stopped me from getting here, some of the hurdles that I've overcome, which is why I talk about government regulations getting in the way. I'm not trying to suggest we should have none, but I think that we need to be sensible about how these regulations work and how they hurt small people and small family-owned businesses. Much of this doesn't actually apply to me. Now, I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. I'm not here to tell you he's fantastic. And as I said before, whether it be Brexit in the UK or whether it be Donald Trump's policies in the US, even though I'm not American, Donald Trump's policies hurt me. They're not good for me because the focus on America first interrupts the sort of international trade that I am involved in. However, the reason why I call this out is because little people like I once was, I feel get hurt. There is nothing that could happen that would be better for me financially than if Joe Biden wins this election. There is nothing better that would happen financially for me than if the Labor Party wins the next election in Australia or wins, as they just did, the election in the UK. I'm Australian and British, if you're not aware of that. But I'm not going to sit there and advocate for positions that I think are bad for everybody else. I spend my life trying to advocate for people to be able to get ahead. So yes, I will fully acknowledge that I'm one of those elites, but I am not supporting Donald Trump at all. And I'm certainly not advocating for him because he's in my interests, because he's really, really not. And for example, he's talking about putting a tariff on indiscriminately on all goods coming into the US. That doesn't help me. That makes it really bad for me because I'm not American. And as I alluded to before, there's a lot of foreign lobbying money that comes into US politics. So at some point, people on the inside that are beneficiaries of this should actually stand up and say something. And the last point I'll just make, which is slightly off the topic, when I go to Las Vegas, gambling wins in the United States are taxable unless you come from a tax treaty country. Because I'm British, which is a tax treaty country, I don't have to pay tax on my wins. As a result, after the casinos give me the same sorts of benefits and rebates that I would get if I was American, my trips to Las Vegas are effectively subsidized by the US taxpayer. Now, I'm not complaining. That's awesome for me, but it's not so awesome for you guys. So when I say that, I say it from the heart because of how much I care about the United States, love the United States, and respect the United States. And I think that you guys do so much for the rest of the world, and so therefore you guys actually deserve a bit better out of your own government.
Hey, Shaq, just really quickly, because I know we're almost done and everything. I did see your hand in Toby and everything. But what defines a wealthy person? Because I was just talking to a friend of mine who literally has a fight control business and everything, and he is literally going to possibly buy a new simulator. That simulator is going to be $250,000. Some people might consider that elite money. I don't know, but there are other people that might not consider it elite money.
So my answer to that question, Mark, is that you are wealthy when you can live the lifestyle you've always dreamed of and have the ability to pay for that out of relatively passive income. Okay, so you've got enough assets that will generate an income for you to be able to sustain the sort of lifestyle that you want. I don't think that there's a figure for that, because depending on who you are, different people will have a different figure.
Fair enough. Jacoby, really quickly, and answer, and then we're getting out.
Okay, really quickly, since there's a lot of stuff that we covered. When Dan first started off, he started talking about I've been gaslighting, which is incorrect. I've been actually telling the truth. In terms of what Dan said, flooding illegals to vote, that is factually incorrect, because undocumented immigrants coming into the country cannot vote in federal elections. They cannot. That is illegal. They cannot do that, and they are not doing that. So that is actually a gaslighting thing that Dan was bringing up. In terms of the economy, Shaq and I are aligned a lot on what we're talking about in the economy. However, the particulars are where we differ in terms of, yes, it's true. If we go directly after and say, oh, well, we're going to tax wealth on this part. Well, yes, it's true that many people in that wealth class are actually going to shift their money around, which we completely agree on that. Hence the reason why I'm in agreement with a lot of what, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and that whole crew were talking about closing these tax loopholes, which would attack and generate more revenue coming in based off of taxing that income or that movement, and not allowing for that movement to become a tax shelter, or a wealth shelter, which it becomes, which is a lot of things that which a lot of the wealthy end up moving their stuff around. So yes, they can't be taxed. So yes, we've got to be very. We have to figure a way to tax those individuals in a better way, so we can actually have a better, more progressive tax rate where those individuals at the top are actually paying, even when they shift their money around, which they do a lot to avoid paying taxes, which the commoner cannot do. And when we're talking about the commoner and the rich, yes, there are individuals. For example, if you go to